This week on the Eldritch Lorecast,
Netflix is officially developing a Forgotten Realms TV series.
Good stuff. Exciting. We'll see if it makes it to the finish line.
Your goo!
Pathfinder announced it has a relationship scale with NPCs.
God, I hate Snapchat! Don't make me do it!
Players get kind of main character syndrome.
This is the worst day of my life.
Took up close-up magic when I was in high school, like right at the end of high school as well.
My reaction was me relating to deciding to do close-up magic in high school. Oof.
You as well?
Because we're both losers, Ben.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. That's right. If you're wondering who is blowing out your microphone right now, or my microphone, your earbuds, it's me, Ben Byrne, and I am joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill,
It's
Shawn
me, Dael Kingsmill.
It's me, Adam Carnevale, who's here guest hosting this week in place of the wandering James Hake.
Adam, it's you. You're in here. Oh my God. We gotta, someone's gotta tell Adam that there's two of him suddenly. And I am, of course, Shawn. Lovable, dependable, beautiful Shawn.
Shawn, who beat up close-up magicians for their lunch money as a kid.
Hey, kid. This is what you sound. This is what I sounded like as a child. This is a normal child's voice. Hey, kid, you want to see lunch money disappear? Well, watch it disappear into my pocket.
That's exactly what I sounded like when I was smoking at age 11.
I had to say the same thing.
Yeah.
More lunch lady, less Shawn as a kid.
There you go.
Well, speaking of lunch ladies and abrasive personalities, Adam, I'm going to ask you first. When you're playing a tabletop RPG, particularly a fantasy one, what's your favorite species to play as or to GM?
I like to GM a group of old dwarves. There's something funny about that. It's inherently great. It reminds me a little bit of The Hobbit, and also I think players have a lot of fun when they're role-playing dwarves. I don't know. It just unlocks something in the human brain to be role-playing as a dwarf.
Can you give us a little bit of what that role-playing looks like as a dwarf?
The one that immediately comes to my mind is a game I ran where everyone lost themselves in hysterical fits. They could not stop laughing at the idea of naming themselves after South, because they kept thinking, oh, South is down. And so all of them called themselves South in a different language. That was all of their names. The best character was Dune Sooth, who, not in a different language, in a different accent. We couldn't stop laughing at that as well. And then they decided that they were going to invest everything they had in a dog companion that they'd purchased for 25 gold. So this dog, let me tell you, it was kitted out to the nines. They spent all of their starting equipment getting boots, a cape, a collar, some lovely goggles for this dog. They got 2 sets of boots, front and back, and then they became sidekicks to the dog, and the adventure was, I think the dog was called Pooch, and we called the adventure Pooch and Pals. People just they're happy to become belligerent and a bit silly, and I think that's funny.
Dael Kingsmill, if you become belligerent and a bit funny, what species are you role-playing?
I'm always belligerent and a bit funny, so I guess the species I'm playing doesn't matter so much. But as a player, I'm a real sucker for a lot of your classic like fantasy edgelord races. So I love a half-elf, I love a wood elf, I love a tiefling. And I also do love playing a human, I really do. But I think like particularly in video games, which is different to what you're asking, it's like I had to train myself out of my habit of going, but it's loserly to play the most fantasy species, so I will play a human, when really I just wanted to play like the Kunari or the elf or the whatever. So I had to get back to that place of just embracing the nerd. But I do still love playing humans. But as a GM, I don't know. I think I love running for humans because I have a trick that I always pull out of my magician's hat, my close-up magician's hat, which is just I love that when half the party have dark vision and so they're seeing in grayscale. I love throwing in little flashes of like red to freak out the like if something gets lit up, just showing it in red, and they're the only one who can see the tons of red that's coming through while everyone else is seeing in grayscale. I love doing stuff like that. Oh, and I'm excited for like the Revenant and the Memenek in Draw Steel. So
yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, I find I generally drift towards like the edgelord options as well, but then pushing into like I'm the reason we're in the situation we are now with orcs as humanoids and player species, because I'm constantly pushing more into like what's the most monstrous thing I can get away with playing that technically is still a humanoid character that ends up kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Gentrifying a lot of species over time. You know, it's not a half elf's not quite enough. I need to be like a Dhampir or a werewolf or a revenant or something that really messes with the concept of player character. Shawn Moon, what about yourself?
See, this is why I love the gnome, because the gnome is the thing that was that oddity before they allowed orcs and goblins and kobolds and all the quote unquote monstrous species of the past. Because in Tolkien, right, Tolkien taught us what an elf is and what a dwarf is and what an orc is and all of those things, but there's no gnomes there. So the gnomes just became this sort of strange thing that no one was quite sure what they are. And what they are, I've decided, is these horrifying little creatures, little grubby, horrible, like me when I was taking lunch money from close-up magicians, basically. So this has come full circle now. So I loved because I love playing them differently. And everyone's like, "Is that what a gnome's like?" And I'm like, "It is now."
Yo.
Point to me, in your fantasy fiction where a gnome is anything that is set in stone, like we got with the Tolkien-esque things.
It sounds almost like you're going into red cap territory there with
just a wee bit, maybe just a wee bit, yeah. And as a GM, I love lizard folk. I love playing them as against the players. Because lizard folk they do have some lore in D&D. In the original Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, they're the thing you meet that you don't quite know what they are, and you might attack them, but it turns out that they're actually not that bad, and they're being attacked by this who again, spoiler for like a 50-year-old adventure. And then you can play like the mammalian species are sort of this way, but I love this lizard type aesthetic that you can bring. Like they're not quite like you, although they still do communicate and they have a society. They're just that little bit alien that you can have some fun playing with them that way.
Yeah, I've told this story before, but it's exactly why I like these changes that Wizards of the Coast have made to separating humanoids from monsters a little bit more in the new rules. Goblins becoming fae and kobolds becoming dragons, because it does create like a real delineation between people and, I suppose I don't want to say not people, but like people and like monstrous creatures that are similar but different in some way. And when you say, okay, these are the humanoid species, these are the common folk of the realm, and then they go into the wilderness. I remember telling players specifically, like, I really am not a fan of anthropomorphic species for player characters like Aarakocra and Tabaxi and that sort of thing. And then they ran into a culture of Aarakocra in Chult, because it's just written into the adventure. And my party were like, wait a minute, I thought you said Aarakocra don't exist in this world. I was like, but isn't it so much more mystical now that like you're discovering that they do exist, and it's kind of, it creates a stronger juxtaposition.
Did they think that it was mystical, or were they just annoyed?
Honestly, one of them ended up playing one of those Aarakocra for a little while, but we all had a good time.
I get it a bit. I understand the touching on what you were just saying, but I get the like impetus to be like, oh, they made bird or they made cat, or they made dog or whatever, but person, that's kind of boring, isn't it? Can't you can do anything. Why do something like that? But I mean, like, I get it, and I understand, and I think Aarakocra specifically, forgive me please, but I feel like the lore around Aarakocra played out, I guess.
Have you seen the Forgotten Realms?
Sorry?
Well,
Bird people who live in monasteries? I don't know. I don't know. It feels like the human of playing a human of lore. Is it like the boring option?
Sure.
See, for me, I grew up several consoles behind everyone else in video games. So I was playing, while everyone else was playing like the hot new thing, I was playing this like off-brand Nintendo 64 game where it was all animal humanoids who were martial artists. And the ultimate guy was the Dalai Lama, but he was an actual llama. And I was the rabbit. Like, it was like, that was my childhood, so I'm into it.
Look, I'm into that sort of stuff if that's the setting. But if it's not the setting, like I really loved Ori and the Blind Forest made me want to play a D&D campaign where I'm just like, everybody choose an anthropomorphic species and we'll all be like forest spirits or whatever, If that's, part of the story that you're trying to tell, I'm into it. But
my mother, who has just taken up video games for the first time, has crushed Ori and the Blind Forest and is on to the second one right now.
Nice.
They're so beautiful. They're so beautiful.
Give me more plasmids. That's what I want. You can have your fox people. Just give me a plasmid.
Yes. How could I have guessed that Adam Carnivale loves plasmids?
You're goo. You're goo.
Yeah, that's all you are.
That's so fun.
All right, I'll take your word for it. Speaking of fun, the reason that we are talking about species for the third episode in a row is because a tiny little bit of news eked out of another D&D video as they continue to go through the monster manual and talk about humanoids. And Jeremy Crawford mentioned that anyone who is eager for those species-tailored humanoid stat blocks are going to see more of them in the setting books that Wizards of the Coast are bringing out. We know that there is a Forgotten Realms one specifically, which will feature the malevolent drow of Menzoberranzan, so that you will have those kind of specific cultures represented in stat blocks for their specific setting. And I'm a fan of this because I think that the monster manual, as they said in the video, is your toolbox of general, like, here's all the monsters, and here's some humanoid stat blocks of the roles that humanoids might fulfill in your campaign. And then here are some potentially species or possibly even culture-specific stat blocks. We've got the Valican clan stat blocks in the Grimhollow Valican clans. We've got the Arcanist Inquisition stat blocks. They're not species necessarily, but there's like a defining culture around these stat blocks that inform their abilities. And I think that's a cool approach for Drow and potentially Orcs in future as well. We shall see. How do other folks feel about this promise, if you will?
That first part where he's talking about, here's the categories. Here's like tough guy. I think the examples he gives are like tough guy. That's actually the only one I remember. But there were other examples.
Yeah. I think like performer.
Yeah.
Cultist.
I love that. And that is stuff that I already do. And it's streamlining my specific play style as a dungeon master. Because I already do, whenever I need an NPC, if I need one off like the top of my head, I'll just search. I'll use all the other little noodly search options that you get on D&D Beyond, where I'll search by like spell casting or stuff like that, and I'll find, and so many of the NPCs, the humanoid NPCs, they have just like names rather than guard or priest or assassin. Those exist, but a lot of the NPCs just have a name. So I need to read through their stat block. And I think this is going to really make my life so much easier. So thank you, Jeremy Crawford, as a late birthday gift for your good boy, Adam.
I love the positivity. Have you seen the first 2 seasons of Castlevania? Oh my God, heartbreaking, touching, incredible. Arcane, oh my God. And speaking of Netflix is officially developing a Forgotten Realms TV series in partnership with Hasbro, which could potentially, rumors abound, and predictably, launch a D&D universe. This is separate from the TV series that was being worked on over at Paramount through E1 as well, I believe, which was Hasbro's media company that they have since sold off and is no longer part of Hasbro. Drew Crivello, who doesn't have a lot of credits to his name currently, at least not that folks would know about, is the showrunner and reportedly writing the pilot. He has come over from the Paramount series, is my understanding. So there's a similar creative team, but they're not connected in any way. And also involved, and this one's interesting, is Shawn Levi, I'm assuming being brought in to direct an episode, who directed episodes on Stranger Things. Most recently, Deadpool and Wolverine was the director, and Night at the Museum. So sort of, making an assumption based on his credits, you can see the kind of tone that they're going for is maybe closer to an Honor Among Thieves style, lighthearted series as opposed to Netflix's swing at fantasy with The Witcher. But to note as well, this looks like it will unlikely be, despite having the same setting, The Forgotten Realms, is unlikely to be related to Honor Among Thieves because that was made over at Paramount, and who knows where the rights break down in terms of who owns specifically what character and how that would work out. But this new series currently is unrelated until in like 5 years' time, Edgin rocks up randomly and everybody goes, whoa, in an end credit sequence.
Good stuff. Exciting. We'll see if it makes it to the finish line, because not just D&D stuff, but any sort of series has a slim chance of ever making it from the stage where it's at in development to finally getting out there into the world. So hopeful it would be great.
And then once it does, it will get 2 seasons and no more.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if this is Netflix's, this seems like a natural fit for Netflix to take on the fantasy series, particularly D&D, Stranger Things, having that kind of cross-pollination there. But I think that, everybody's taken their swing at the Game of Thrones follow-up. Netflix had The Witcher famously, Wheel of Time, Rings of Power. They've all been terrible. No apologies. And I wouldn't be surprised with The Witcher kind of winding down. I think they've said even with Liam Hemsworth stepping into the role, there's only 1 or 2 seasons left. Probably only 1 left if this next one doesn't do particularly well. I wouldn't be surprised if this is their next, like Netflix is thinking ahead and like, okay, what fantasy IP could we try to take a second swing at the fantasy IP Game of Thrones TV series with? And I almost said Lord of the Rings then. D&D, I think, fits that bill for them.
A lot of people have tried, even Game of Thrones with, what's that series?
House of the Dragon?
Yeah, House of the Dragon. Even that. I know the first couple of seasons did... Oh, sorry?
I forgot about that.
Well, I was going to say, I know the first couple of seasons did really well, but I think it started to drop off. I think people are losing interest in that. I agree earlier as well with you saying maybe only 2 seasons. The problem with sci-fi and fantasy is that they're both they're so expensive to make. You really need a huge return on investment. And, Netflix canceled shows for way less than that. So yeah, I am dubious as to how long-lived. If this D&D show lives, it'll have to be a huge landmark sort of thing. It'll need to really extend outside of the normal TTRPG fan space.
In fact, I would go as far as saying don't mention Dungeons and Dragons in the title. Right now, the tentative title is The Forgotten Realms, which I
Call
will
it
swear.
Stranger Things Part 2.
Exactly. I will swear on a stack of Bibles that if Game of Thrones had been called Dungeons and Dragons Game of Thrones, no one would have watched it. All of the people that I met at the water cooler and out going, oh, can you believe what happened there? I'm like, you're watching Dungeons and Dragons. They're like, no, it's not. Dungeons and Dragons is for nerds. This is cool.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not talking about our niche fans and the people we hang around with. I'm talking about, the marketing folks at the software company I worked at, where I sidled away from me when they heard that I was involved with Dungeons and Dragons. That's the people that Netflix needs to come watch this show.
Yeah, I agree. I think I mentioned it last week, but similar to what you were saying, Shawn, Game of Thrones, I think, was successful because it didn't feel nerdy, because it was about the politics and it was not about the magic or, it barely even was about like the knightliness, at least not the TV series as much, because it focused on that intrigue and that, who slept with who and whose son is what and, bloodlines and, it felt like The Sopranos or Desperate Housewives of King's Landing in a fantasy setting. And so much so that when I was watching The Witcher season 1, even though I was making a joke before, I actually quite like season 1 of The Witcher, but it, every time something overly magical would happen on screen, I would wrinkle my nose a little bit, not because I thought it was detracting from the show at all, but only because I was like, oh, I think some people will be turned off by that, because that's going to disengage them because it feels too fantastical, too nerdy, so to speak.
And I have a feeling the demographic of, there are a lot of young folks coming into D&D for sure. I don't know if they're Netflix watchers, because I will bring up Netflix with my students.
That's it.
And they will be like, I have not watched Netflix. I watch everything on YouTube.
The youth watch YouTube. They watch TikTok. They watch.
Exactly. And so I don't know if bringing something like that and aiming it for young folks on Netflix is going to serve the best for everyone.
Gods, I just aged some more.
Yes.
This is like when I found out that like if you message people through Facebook or Instagram, you're old. I was like, what?
Welcome to this side Messenger? Of the hill.
No. I used to know what it is. Now it has changed and it seems different to me. Different and bad. And it'll happen like to you too.
Yep.
I refuse to go back to Snapchat. I don't know how it got resurrected, and I won't do it.
Same. Oh my God. I hate Snapchat. Don't make me do it. Don't make me do it.
It's all right. It's all right. You're in a safe space here. You're in a safe space. But speaking of safe spaces, you know what's definitely not a safe space? Jarren's Outpost, I hear, is the least safe space of them all. Jarren's Outpost, an upcoming board game.
We're making a board game. I and my co-workers, we're making a board game called Jarren's Outpost. It is a programmatic, I think, asymmetrical game where, so it's based on, we had a very popular series for our podcast D&D is for Nerds. We had a very popular series called Jarren's Outpost, played in a city of the same name. Each of the characters were after this kind of MacGuffin object, but they wanted it for different reasons. And they had a common enemy, but the ultimate goal was to be the only person with the MacGuffin at the end. We've tried to, as best as we can, capture that energy of there's no real direct combat with other players, but you're all trying to get things done before the other player can. Each player takes on a different character, and all the characters play quite differently. So we've got, for example, one of the characters is Greg Pierce, who was a very kind of great name. Love it as well.
Awesome.
Greg Pierce is a kind of a slippery eel.
I'm not sure we can say that on YouTube, but continue.
Surely you could say that on YouTube.
Nah, it's probably fine, but
oh, I'm so sorry if I have to be bleeped. It's not
even in their list of curse words that you have to check against monetization.
No, fair enough.
God, I hope so. I hope you don't have to bleep me. I'm so sorry. I'll stop saying. I'll just say Greg.
They don't even know that word exists.
But they will add it
Greg
right
Piss
now.
Is fine. Yeah. Like,
they'll add it.
Why is there so much piss in this episode of the Lorecast?
Some guy at the YouTube content moderation team being like, "This is so unusual for them. Usually, they're such good little creators, never swearing." Never rude at all. And suddenly, this one's XXX rated.
Just piss everywhere. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. Greg Pierce.
Yes, so he's kind of like this really slippery sort of character. Very, I think he's self-described as eel-like. And the way he moves is very different to, say, Periwinkle O'Rourke, who's kind of this big, heavy bruiser sort of character. So and then you've got all these different quests that you're trying to complete, and each character is trying to complete the quest in their own unique way. And so the programmatic part is you have movement cards, which each character has unique movement cards, and you're moving around the game board, which is all the entire board is like, it's all individual tiles, which you shuffle in between games. So every game feels, we're just trying to make every game feel basically like a new thing that you're trying, I guess. We've been working on it. I found out, and this is deeply upsetting to me, I found out that we've been working on this board game for nearly 8 years at this point. That's deeply upsetting to find out.
I was going to say, you were talking about it the first time I visited the recording studio in Melbourne.
Yeah. And we're finally ready to, we've got the Kickstarter. The Kickstarter isn't live yet, but we've got the page that you can follow, which you absolutely should, at Jarren's Outpost.com. Jarren's with 2 R's, Outpost as you would always spell Outpost. One word. I've made this game with Jackson and with Joel Zammett. The three of us are kind of like the creative leads on it, or design leads. And I think it's very funny. I've never gotten a better perspective of our 3 personalities than while making a board game, where Jackson will come up with an idea, and it'll be a insane, crazy idea, like where, I don't know, he's like, what if one character doesn't move? What if one character stays still and all of their movement cards bring people to them? And then Joel Zammett will step in and he'll be like, okay, well, let's try and work that out. And I'll be like, enough! We need to stop! We've done too much! Stop making things!
Yeah, that's the cycle of game design, right, Shawn?
Yeah. At least there's 3 of you and not one person just doing all 3 voices. Not that I would ever.
Oh, God, that sounds horrific.
Yeah.
It seems cool, though. It seems kind of like a chaotic Lords of Waterdeep. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, I agree. The like way that the players interact in Lords of Waterdeep, I think, is very similar. You're all kind of, no one's trying to stab you in the front. It's only stabbing in the back.
Yeah, fair enough. Backstabs only. The most gentlemanly of warfare.
Yes. Oh, of course.
Adam, if you point up and to your left, there will be a link. Yeah, over there, that way, I reckon, popping up right now. So folks can go follow the Kickstarter if they want to get notified for it. Do you have a launch date yet, or is it still? It's
still tentatively March. We'd like to launch.
Awesome. So go check out Jarren's Outpost. And speaking of things that I'm in love with, recently Pathfinder announced they've got a new book coming. We knew about this book for a while. It's called Pathfinder NPC Core, releasing in March. And it is basically a codex of NPCs, not dissimilar to what we were talking about at the top of this episode, actually. A full book, a monster manual, if you will, just filled with different NPCs and different NPC roles and that sort of thing. The reason I bring it up is because the most exciting mechanic of all, they were talking about on Twitch less than a week ago, that it has a relationship scale with NPCs, which goes from vindictive, meaning that the NPC hates you and is your mortal enemy, all the way up to bonded for serious romantic entanglements, if you will. So they're gamifying the relationships of NPCs, saying that this is not for every single NPC that you might come across in your game, but a handful of the more important NPCs to your campaign. Everybody knows how much I love mechanizing social interactions in games. What do we think, folks? Does this sound like an exciting addition to Pathfinder or any RPG?
What this is, the thing about it for me is that this is a house rule that I homebrewed into my game. It's an optional house rule in my game. It's in one of my ideas to steal from video games videos, because I just basically codified the relationship system from Dragon Age and made it like manual so that you could do it at the table. So I'm all for it. But also, I'm like, I've been doing that. I don't need this.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Logan's a great designer, so if anybody can do it and make it work, it's Logan. The question I have is then, what is the mechanic and what's the cost? If you're building a character, is it just an add-on? Or are there feats and are there skills and are there other things that you would need to spend in order to do this that change the way that the game might play, because that's a whole different relationship with game design, making it fit in the broader picture instead of just being this thing that you plunk on top of the game. So it'd be interesting to see how that works out.
Well, what they've referenced so far in terms of being able to move that scale in ways other than just simple role play, I think they made reference to committing insults or giving, I think they called them tokens or something, but basically giving gifts to NPCs,
So,
which...
yeah.
It sounds very Harvest Moon, very kind of Stardew Valley to me, which I think is
Origins,
cute.
Where they, I believe, are called tokens.
So what I think they should do is make you give away a magic item if you are trying to affect a relationship, and we'll see how well that goes over.
I think there are some sort of settings or adventures where that kind of thing will fit more. Like if I was translating it into like 5e stuff, Strixhaven is a great fit for that because they already kind of have that system in there, but I wish it was a little bit more robust. But then I also, for me, I like for it to be a little bit less on the tokens and gifts side of things. Like here, I am plying you with gifts to make you love me. I like it to be more, I secretly give NPCs like broad, like world issues that they care about. And they have an opinion on one side or the other. And if they witness you like being on the other side of it, it will have a negative impact. If they witness you being on the same side of it, it will have a positive impact.
In games, video and TTRPG, the second I understand, or the second I wrap my head around the idea that there's a number that when it goes up, the NPC likes me more, the second I understand that, I become very disengaged.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I cannot. It really reminds me of I mean, like, and I understand why there've been, many different systems. Like my favorite version of D&D 3.5 also had a relationship number that you could ascribe to NPCs. But the entire thing really makes me think of cartoon, and in the cartoon, a belligerent old man says, "Only for nerds would charisma be a fantasy stat." Some line to that effect. I'm very vaguely paraphrasing him, but I don't know, it all makes me feel, it really disengages me. But I understand, like Dael, if you're, especially if you're doing stuff like making the NPC have behind the scenes kind of like objectives that they want, causes that they care about, that seems a lot better than, I know Sten from the original Dragon Age likes paintings, so I will give him
a painting. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And it'll make up for me making these decisions he didn't like. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't tell the players what they do or don't like.
I like that.
I keep that to me, and maybe like the NPC will be mad at them, but it's, it's a little secret for me. It's a little secret for me behind the DM screen.
I guess for me, I would like to see more of like, not just how to move the scale, because for me, as I've expressed through the negotiation rules in the MCDM game as well.
So we kept that, but we made the structure a little looser, a little more freeform, so people like Ben Byrne can feel free to role play.
Overly mechanicalizing social interaction starts to feel weirdly like mind control, where the NPC has to behave, in accordance to the rolls of the dice when it might seem incongruous. But issues that I have had in the past, I will admit, when I think about like long-term relationships, both positive and negative with NPCs, I think of Kawasha, who is an NPC from Tomb of Annihilation. I might be pronouncing the name incorrectly, but he appeared as the guide through Chult for both for two campaigns that I ran there. And the first group treated him really well. He ended up in a romantic relationship with one of the player characters. And he kind of was like one of the party, but he was very much, running an NPC that's following the party, a party follower, if you will. I'm very much like, they make no decisions. They might participate a little bit in combat, but I'd rather, Kawasha's stance was like, I'm here to guide you, but I'm not here to babysit you. So you guys, you tell me where you want to go and I'll help you get there, but I'm not going to help you, fight monsters or something because I'm not very good at it. And the first group, like I said, they were cool with that. The second group thought he was the most useless, insufferable, individual ever, particularly because he was not providing them with any sort of mechanical benefit that they could see, because he would always just stand back in combat and kind of let them handle all the situations. And then within that same campaign, they came across another NPC who was a party follower, who was a mummy, kind of this elf that had mummified themselves to live through the ages and woke up and wanted to help the party. But again, they found him to be kind of weird and insufferable and kept threatening to they were like, maybe if we just put him, he doesn't need to breathe. We'll just put him in the bag of holding and he'll be fine, right? Like we can just keep him in there and it's not a problem. And the dignity of the NPCs. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so for me, it was kind of like, how do I, as the GM, it wasn't that I needed permission for Kawasha or the Elven Mummy to say, you know what, screw you guys, I'm out of here. But I felt like I needed some guidance on what the breaking point should be for those NPCs, because I think a lot of players get kind of main character syndrome, which is not surprising because they're the main characters in their campaign.
Yeah.
But then they start treating every NPC like they are less than, you know?
It's funny that you bring this up, though, because it makes me think of In Dusk. We had this character that was meant to be our point of contact. Like, the original person we went to rescue was this woman. Her name was, like, Demelza or something. I don't remember. But we we started hating her so fast. And she was always just popping up in the middle of like team planning sessions. Like we're going to die in this forest. How are we going to get out? And she's just like, hello there. No, go away. We hated her. And then it turned out that in the background, one of the player characters was having a romance with her. I still feel very betrayed about it.
I have had players. I have seen players in the past be like, in character and out of character, saying they're nothing people. They don't exist. Who cares?
I play video games, I've said this before, in a very role play way, where I'm trying to really invest myself in the world and treat the NPCs as if they are real people that I'm role-playing and interacting with, which is fraught in a video game because then they'll start clipping through the wall or they'll have limited dialogue options and my fantasy starts to break down a little bit. So I appreciate people bringing to video games the attitude of just like, you know, be through the dialogue options. Let's just get through this and now I'm going to run off to the next place I need to be. I just, I struggle with people who play D&D like that, because there's a DM on the other side of the interactions, you know, and the NPCs are their opportunity to roleplay and engage with the game.
I like a such and such liked that, such and such disliked that. That sort of feedback, I do enjoy that. That's
would you give that to players through this Pathfinder-esque scale? I'm going to call it Pathfinder-esque,
sure.
but I know, as you all said,
I might. Having, with what limited information I have with these rules, I want to go in, you know, with a open mind. I don't think I'll like them, but I'll give them a try and see if I do. Because if I do, then hell yeah, that rules.
Chat is not remember. I just want to clear this up. My memory is that Zoga and Demelza kissed at some point. That's my memory of the game, but no one in chat who watched Dusk remembers this. So maybe I'm just hallucinating. I just want to cover that.
Chat.
I just want to cover that so that when the comments come on YouTube, they know what's happening.
Roll the tape. How many hours of Dusk are there actually before I...
Oh, probably quite a lot, because there's at least one episode where half the runtime is all the boys talking about Transformers.
Yeah,
cool.
And Anna and I just being like, we were going to play D&D, right? Like at some point.
Well, speaking of getting to things at some point, Kickstarter have announced a new feature called Pledge Over Time, which allows backers to pay for their pledges in 4 equal installments, each installment 2 weeks apart. It's a flexible payment option aimed at giving backers more opportunity to choose higher reward tiers or potentially back bigger, more ambitious projects that they weren't sure about. This is opt-in for project creators as far as I know, and will be more widely available later in the year. And aiming to compete with Stretch Pay, which has been offered on GameFound for at least a little while. I've noticed it on there. As an Australian who uses Afterpay relatively regularly, I think this is a cool option. I like this. Do not take any of the next part of this segment as financial advice for anybody. But personally, I think it's a good option.
I like it. I'm all for, as someone who has a Kickstarter coming out possibly in March, Jarren's Outpost, 2 R's, Outpost as you would spell outpost.com. I'm a big fan of giving people, just in general, I'm a big fan of giving people more ways to interact. Especially if it's opt-in like this is. So depending on the creator, the project creator gets to determine if this is something they'd like to do, and then the backer gets to determine if that's something they'd like to back. So it feels like everyone's getting more options, which I think is good.
Yeah, it's rarely you get the win-win-win, and this seems like a win-win-win. The pledgers want to do it. If the creators want to do it, and if Kickstarter is able to manage it, then let's give all the options we can.
Yeah, in terms of win-win-win, my understanding, so I don't think this company exists abroad, although they're trying to break out, I would imagine. And I don't intend to advertise for them freely, but it's a service I use called Afterpay in Australia. And it's very similar, where you take your purchase, you split it into 4 and then pay it over 2 weeks is each installment. So usually 2 months go and you've paid the full thing. And it is convenient for like, well, I can't afford this thing, or it's a bit too much to take out of my bills this week. But if, I'll get my next paycheck by the time it's time to pay the next installment. So it's convenient, it's useful. There's no additional cost. I believe the way, though, that it makes money is by charging the store extra. So it's not as good for the store itself. I can't imagine that's the way it will work via Kickstarter, because there's already interaction with Kickstarter and then the project that's being backed. So maybe this is win-win-win. But I thought I'd mention that, where is there an extra cost to this, to the backer or the project? I don't know, but I can't imagine so.
The closest example of that then would be something like Visa or MasterCard, who also charge the merchant a small percentage of every transaction used via their services. And I mean, yeah, the Visa and MasterCard, even if they are charging, most merchants will still allow you to pay with Visa or MasterCard because it's very convenient for customers to be able to do that. So yeah, I find Afterpay is really useful for tickets specifically, something that has kind of like a timed element. And like you're like, oh, it's a bit too much to pay for because tickets to some things can be quite expensive, but that's a different conversation. And I really want to get a ticket now while they're available, but I would like the option to be able to spread that payment over several installments.
Well, I guess that applies to crowdfunding as well, right? Because though there are options to late pledge, typically campaigns run for a limited amount of time. And also, unlocking stretch goals and things like that doesn't happen through late pledge.
Sometimes
typically.
Those high-level tiers, there's only, X number of them available.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah, cool. Good change. It's interesting. There is a little bit of a broiling competition between, particularly in the tabletop space, between Kickstarter, GameFound, and BackerKit, which is fascinating. I've been debating how much of it to bring to the Lorecast, how much people will find it interesting, but we'll keep our finger on the pulse and see how it continues to develop. GameFound catching up to Kickstarter in terms of projects funded for tabletop specifically.
I've heard this, yeah.
Which is funny because I'm not going to lie, I thought GameFound was a scam when I first heard about it, just because I didn't. It is only because I didn't know how it functioned. This was before I was working for Ghostfire, and there was The Witcher Old World. I was like, it went to Kickstarter first, and then it did a second campaign at GameFound, and I was like, but the Kickstarter's over. How is this still available? I don't know. This seems wrong. It is definitely not. It is, finding a way to compete with Kickstarter. Speaking of competing, we don't always have to. Sometimes we can become friends. With this last little tidbit of news, Steve Jackson Games and Possum Creek are 2 RPG publishers or board game publishers, partly in the case of Steve Jackson Games, that are coming together and combining, Possum Creek becoming a imprint of Steve Jackson Games. For folks that aren't aware, Steve Jackson Games is most notable for Munchkin, the card game, but also owns and publishes content for GURPS quite regularly, the generic universal role-playing game system.
Yeah.
Possum Creek, I was not aware of them before, but they seem delightful. Known for Wander Home, a game where players play as traveling animal folk through pastoral fantasy world, which won Best Family-Friendly Game at the 2022 ENnie Awards. It seems really cool. It seems kind of like a cozy RPG.
I'm about to play me the Bremen Musicians.
Okay.
That's a little fairy tale reference about wandering animals through pastoral landscapes. So I thought that would be a more well-known fairy tale. Turns out it wasn't. We live with our choices.
As someone who strikes out like that all the time, and earlier on this very podcast, I feel so sorry. I wish I could have helped.
Oh yeah, the Bremen thing. Yeah.
The Bremen Musicians.
Yeah.
The Bremen
Absolutely.
Musicians.
Sure.
That's right.
Those musicians from
now I
Bremen.
remember.
Yeah.
The Badger with the electric guitar. I totally, Yep.
The thing about the Bremen Musicians is that by the name, no one can fake knowing what it's about because it never actually, they're never in Bremen and they're never musicians anyway.
Then why would you listen to them?
You don't. They scare some rubbers. It's not.
Isn't that what you just said, though? I'm about to listen to the Bremen Musicians?
No, I'm about to play me some Bremen Musicians. I'm going to be the Bremen Musicians. Because they're animals and they're traveling through pastoral lands.
I thought you were going to put it on Spotify or something. I'm going to play me some, some Bremen Musicians. Like it was like
this
a band.
This is the worst day of my life.
Oh my God.
All right, anyway. Possum Creek Games are joining Steve Jackson Games. It seems like a good partnership. Jay Dragon, who's the editorial director of Possum Creek and designed Wander Home, is joining the Steve Jackson Games board. And look, it's just a little nice, cozy story about companies coming together and getting to hopefully make more cool stuff together. So if you're a fan of either of those companies, keep an eye on them. Adam, what's the email address that people would send their emails to if they wanted to email the number one D&D podcast in all the realms?
Oh my God. We what an interesting question with a very long answer. Let me say, and I know the answer.
Okay.
Oh my God, why can I not type while I'm panicking? The Eldritch Lorecast, and before I give you the answer, I have to ask you a question.
Yeah.
The Eldritch Lorecast or the Eldritch Lorecast, which would you say?
Neither.
You just said two wrong things.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Well, then how would you say it?
Well, I would say it Eldritch Lorecast. But if you're asking how I would say the podcast email address, it would be podcast at ghostfiregaming.com.
Dante in chat trying to give you the answer.
Well, for once, I wish I read the chat.
Also, who's Eldrick?
He's an old mate of mine. Don't worry.
Gotcha. Cool. All right, no problem.
He's an old mate whose name I always say when I'm panic typing and I can't spell the word podcast somehow.
Gotcha. Speaking of old friends, Seth has emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com asking, how far apart should settlements be as players travel through the game world? Common advice that they've heard is that it should be about a day's journey and no further. But for Seth's money, that seems too close, particularly for a dark fantasy setting. And I think kind of tied into this question is how to make travel feel dangerous, how to make the wilderness feel dangerous, particularly in 5e where, a long rest in a camp and suddenly you're ready to go again means that each day's journey doesn't really mean much unless you slow it right down.
How long's a piece of string, I suppose? The settlements should be as far apart as feels necessary for the environment and for the game that you're trying to run. If you want dark fantasy, if you want your players to be scared, then a day is. I mean, for 5th ed, maybe, because as you were saying, the every long rest is essentially a new. The player is completely refreshed. There's very few abilities or powers that don't come back after a long rest in 5th ed. But if you can wrangle it, if you could figure it out, there's many mechanics for making night times out and about a lot more dangerous. Like I know in Barovia, there's an entirely separate rolling system for if you're off the road and if you're at night. And if you're off the road, you always roll on the regular night table. But then when it's at night and you're off road, things get really kind of hectic and scary. And I think you should just make long rests. If you want that dark fantasy feeling, long rests just shouldn't be a guarantee. You should either use a slightly different mechanic where a long rest happens over the course of a week, which is in the original 5th ed DMG, and I think it's in the updated one as well. Or you could just make them roll random encounters more often. Make the players roll random encounters as well. I find that really the players get really scared when they see that they've rolled high on the random encounter table. I love that. I think it's great.
Also, frankly, I mean, Adam does a thing when he's DMing where he'll get you to roll a thing and he'll just be like, okay, highs or lows. And because he rolls the dice. So he'll be like highs or lows, and you have to pick whether you think the dice is going to be high or low. And then he makes you second guess it. And it's very stressful as an experience. So I can see how the players would feel that way, Adam. But yeah, I completely agree. It's like, what do you want the genre of this game to be? What do you want the play experience to feel like? Are you putting a massive influence on emphasis on survival and tracking your resources and journeying / exploration? Is it a dungeon delve? Is it, or is it a high drama, high politic, a sort of action game? Because we're on different ends of the spectrum, and that's what it's going to come down to. And I think there are lots of things, lots of dials you can turn to play with that if you're into homebrewing. But there's really no one answer how far apart they should be. I quite firmly do not believe that reality has a role to play in this question of how far apart should the settlements be, because whether you are going in the direction of further apart or closer together, it doesn't matter. It's all about the genre.
Wilderness can be a character in your game. And how that character interacts with the players and with the villains and with the story is up to you as the game master. And so you should let the characters interact with that NPC, the wilderness. Are they going to try to conquer it? Are they going to try to avoid it? Is it so ubiquitous that there are towns everywhere that it's not an important character in your game at all? In that case, don't bother rolling random table encounters in the wilderness, because it doesn't matter. But if it's going to be an important part of your campaign, then make it a character and make it count. There should be several encounters in a row where you are dealing with the wilderness, and it shouldn't be random, and it shouldn't be, let's see what happens. It should be absolutely thought out story-wise. How does the villain, if there's a villain other than the wilderness, use the wilderness? How can the characters change the wilderness or use the wilderness to their advantage? You could have a whole system of conquering the wilderness by creating new settlements. Did you create it in the right spot? Are you taking the care to protect that wilderness? That then becomes a story all in itself. So as Adam and Dael both said beautifully, it depends.
Yeah, it depends on, is travel important to your campaign? I remember sticking in my head, it's an old Colville video, but where he talks about, video games again, his time working in was it Mercenaries he was talking about? Yeah. And you jump in the helicopter and take like a 20-minute trip in the helicopter, and it's just not particularly fun to do that every time. I'm playing Kingdom Come Deliverance at the moment, but, Skyrim, very similar example. I try not to fast travel as often as possible, but it's because I want my experience to be like very roleplay heavy and very like I am traveling this world and discovering things, and travel is part of it. but eventually start to use fast travel because I'm more invested in the quest in the moment than I am traveling between each settlement every time. And so if your party are traveling between settlements and it's not part of the story of your campaign, just fast travel them there. You know what I mean? And jump them to the place where the dungeon is rather than making them walk the 20 minutes to the dungeon.
With some of the organized play campaigns I've worked with over the years, I would always get an adventure at 10th, 11th, 12th level where the whole adventure was, well, they're leaving Waterdeep and they're going to Baldur's Gate. So we're going to have 4 encounters along the way. And I'm like, guess what? Fly spell, teleport, half the adventure's over. So let's not do that.
Sure. That makes sense. Well, the flip side, the inverse of that is if you want travel to be important, in a campaign that I ran 2 years ago now, they were traveling from Grabenstein in Etheris to another nation, to Fallowheart, which is in Astoria, through a mountain range, if you're familiar with the setting. And I wanted the travel to be the story because they're going from one nation to another. I wanted the culture to change. I wanted the landscape to change. I wanted them to notice how the sun stops rising after they start to get through the mountain range into Astoria. So you treat the wilderness like it is a dungeon that they have to get through. It's not just random encounters. It's do you want to take the high road or do you want to take the low road and create different encounters? Do you want to try and take a shortcut through this cave or do you want to try and, traverse this cliff face instead and create encounters around that? And that slows the game right down. It means it might take multiple sessions to get to where they're going, but that's because travel is the story of the game that you're telling. And then the other, if you want the midpoint in between, where you want the travel to be important, but you don't want it to take session after session after session like a dungeon delve, they can't long rest unless they're in a settlement, is basically the way that Grim Hollow tackles it. So
that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, it means that you can have random encounters across multiple days and then not getting everything back.
I really like that. That's a very cool mechanic.
That's reminiscent of Draw Steel's solution to it was like, you can rest and you can use recoveries while you're out in the wilderness and fighting and whatever. But if you want to get everything back, you have to go back to Rivendell is the way that they describe it. It's like you have to actually go to a genuinely safe place. I'm sitting here wondering how long I could get away with just ripping off the map pattern from the first Pokemon games.
I reckon a while.
Yeah.
I reckon it'd take a little while before people will notice. As long as I'm not throwing Zubats at them the whole time that they're in Mount Moon, I think I can get away with it.
As long as it's not just Zubat Mountain, as its real name was, not Moon Mountain.
The number of times I've never noticed a detail about a map until I as a player have mapped out an entire section of a dungeon or a forest or something like that as the dungeon master's describing it. And then found out later on they have hidden details in the map, but only when I see the proper produced map. I think you could very easily get away with that, Dael.
Oh yeah, I'm already plotting.
Has anybody tried? Because I've heard folks trying this, and this is shifting the topic a little bit. But I just want to, on the topic of getting away with things, has anybody tried putting the same players through the same dungeon? Or even just the same layout, even if it's filled with different encounters, and gotten away with it?
Not and gotten away with it.
Okay.
Never tried.
Something I've been tempted to try. Just change the set dressing a little bit, but it's ultimately the same layout.
My tip is don't announce the names of rooms because they'll remember that.
Oh,
I love being the dreaded room 18. If it's numbered, the dreaded room 18 when a player step into a room always gets a laugh. And if they do have proper names like Saw Trap Room, definitely don't say that.
But I think there's a genius tip in there, which is do say the name of rooms if it means the players are going to remember it, because that makes remembering the layout of the dungeon much easier for players. You don't have to say this is the room with the terrible trap in it, but you could say you enter the kitchen, the bloody kitchen, or you enter the dining hall, or you enter the west tower. You're in the west tower, I think is a way for players to be, if you don't have that one player who's mapping it out in their sketchbook, or you're not mapping it out or using a VTT, giving names to rooms might be a nice way. Can we go back to the West Tower? Because I want to, there's something I want to go see there. Anyway, I just thought that was a clever tip within your tip then. But don't do it if you're trying to disguise the dungeon.
Definitely don't. When you say room number 18 the second time, they're like, hey, Adam, when you said room number 1, we kind of figured it out. But room 18 is really giving it away.
Well, speaking of giving it away, we have to give away this podcast recording because it is time to end the show. Wah, wah. Sad that we're ending the show now. But we will be back next week. Yay! If you want to see us live on Twitch, you can tune in 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on a Monday, or it is 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Time on a Tuesday. Come join the chat like all these wonderful people. Thank you, chat, for being here. Or you can catch us on YouTube. Likes, stars, we hunger for them. And speaking of liking things, Adam, where can folks go if they want to find you and like the things that you do?
You can find me at Retro Archetype on pretty much any social media that you can imagine. Retro, as you would spell it, Archetype is going to be a bit tough for you, but I have absolute faith you'll figure that one out. One word, typically. Also, you could find me on D&D is for Nerds, the podcast that I host and run and whatnot. And finally, you can find the board game I made at Jarren's Outpost, 2 words, stick'emtogether.com. No, that's not the full. It's just Jarren's Outpost. There's no other. I said a bunch of other things. Just Jarren's Outpost. Don't add 2 words, stick them together. That will not get you the right website.
Okay, we'll take your word for it.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that being said, we'll catch you next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Babada babada babada. Babada ba.
He is abusing this power.
You should use that only for
what
good.
did we come up with last week? Wow, woo,
I genuinely don't remember.
I don't remember what we talked about.
Oh, Wiggly
earlier.
Woo. It was Wiggly Woo.
Wiggly wiggly woo. That's what it was.